Shall we turn to Psalm 129? Psalm 129, verse 5.
Let them all be confounded and turned back that hate Zion.
Let them all be confounded and turn back that hate Zion. Zion is a beautiful place. There are many beautiful places in the world. How many of you have ever been to the Grand Canyon in Arizona? It's beautiful. Some of you may have witnessed the Niagara Falls. That's beautiful. How many of you witnessed a sunset in the Sahara Desert? That's beautiful too. Anyone been to the tiger nest in Bhutan? That's also beautiful. And competing for its place as the 8th wonder of the world is the cliffs of Moher in Ireland and the Matterhorn Mountains in Switzerland is also a brilliant spectacle to behold. There are very, very beautiful places in the world. But there is a place concerning which God Himself has said, don't even try imagining how beautiful it is, because you can't imagine. It is so beautiful. And St. Paul says, eye hath not seen, ear has not heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man, meaning we can't even imagine how beautiful that place is. And do you know what that place is? No, it's not Zion. That place is New Jerusalem. Once a believer had a vision. In that vision he saw New Jerusalem. And when he saw the beauty of New Jerusalem, he couldn't speak. He said, God, I've heard so many sermons about New Jerusalem. And I never knew it is so beautiful. Why didn't you ever tell me it is so beautiful? I would have, made so many sacrifices long time ago. New Jerusalem is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. He couldn't believe the beauty of New Jerusalem. And he heard a voice saying, my son, this is new earth. How beautiful must New Jerusalem then be? There are beautiful paintings in the world, and one of the world's greatest painters, Leonardo da Vinci, he has painted several paintings. And we know some of Leonardo's famous paintings, and probably the one enigmatic and the most famous of all, Mona Lisa, having its place in the Louvre in France, behind bulletproof glasses, is probably his best. And everyone produces his best, and it comes to a place, he says, I can't produce anything better than that. That's my best. That's the best I can produce. Zion is so perfect. How can someone hate Zion? That's what we read. If anyone hates Zion, let him be confounded. Is it possible? Is it possible for someone to hate Zion? Let him be confounded, or let him be ashamed. The beauty of Zion is not natural beauty. How do we define natural beauty? Natural beauty is something that even a sinner can see and appreciate. A sinner can appreciate all the beautiful places that I mentioned. And another thing about natural beauty, it does not last forever. It will fade and one day disappear. It will no longer be a beautiful place for you to behold. Probably it may become part of some archaeological excavation, but the beauty does not last forever. Natural beauty will fade away. So the beauty of Zion obviously is not natural, it is supernatural. Now what is Zion? We keep hearing about this word Zion, a 4-letter word, but what is Zion? The Bible makes us understand that Zion was a literal place in the Old Testament. According to 2 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 2, the last part of verse 2, we understand that Zion was called the city of David. It was the city of David, and But sometimes the whole congregation of Israel, all the people of Israel together, they were also referred to as Zion. They were called the daughter of Zion. If you want to make a note, Isaiah chapter 1 verse 8, where it's called the daughter of Zion. So, Zion may be a city, a place, a literal place, or Zion was also a group of people in the Old Testament. But when we study the Bible a little deeper, we begin to understand that there is something very beautiful and very mysterious about this place. Indeed, Zion is very beautiful. Indeed, it is very mysterious. What is Zion? I'll tell you. Zion is the dwelling place of God. If you turn to Psalm 9 and read verse 11, Psalm 9 verse 11.
Sing praises to the Lord, which dwelleth in Zion. Declare among the people his doings.
Sing praises unto God who dwells in Zion. And Psalm 76 verse 2. Psalm 76 verse 2.
In Salem also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion.
His dwelling place is in Zion. Has any one of you ever wanted to post a letter to God? Have you ever thought, I must write a letter to God, I must complain about my husband? Or, I must write a letter to God and share my grievances with God, because I don't think there is anybody else in this whole world who would understand me. It is only God who would understand me. So if you want to write a letter to God and you don't know where to post it, okay, I'll give you the address. The Almighty Yahweh, number 1, Mount Zion at New Jerusalem, heaven. That's the address of God, and that's where God stays. So if you really want to post a letter, send it to that address. Zion is God's address. That is where God stays. In the Old Testament, one man who had a great passion for God and where God stayed was David. He had a big passion for the house of God. And in 2 Samuel chapter 7, the first 3 verses, we see that David had a passion, a burden about the Ark of the Covenant, because that was like, God himself in the Old Testament. He had a sadness in his heart because he dwelt in a beautiful house and he found that God's house was in a decrepit state. It was like the ark had no real place to rest except behind some curtains.
And it came to pass, when the king sat in his house, and the Lord had given him rest round about from all his enemies, that the king said unto Nathan the prophet, See now, I dwell in an house of cedar, but the ark of God dwelleth within curtains. And Nathan said to the king, Go, do all that is in thine heart, for the Lord is with thee.
Although he was a great king, now, none of us has ever been or will ever be a monarch, but if you can just imagine what a king would have on his mind. He was not just a king, he was like the president, he was like the prime minister, he was everything in one. David was the leader of a nation. He had the burdens of the people on his heart, he had decisions to make, and his life was at stake. There were people out to kill him, and there were so many situations that he had to deal with. But in the midst of all this, he was burdened about the ark of God, the place of God's rest. And he said, the ark dwells behind curtains while I am staying in a palace. And he told the prophet, he said, this isn't right. So the prophet said, you go and do all that God has put in your heart. So David had that passion. And my Bible makes me understand that at one point David couldn't sleep. He didn't want, not that he had insomnia, but that he didn't want to sleep. He said, how can I sleep when God's ark has no resting place? That is why when you turn to Psalm 132 and read the first 5 verses, you will understand the heart and the passion that was in David.
Lord, remember David and all his afflictions, how he sware unto the Lord and vowed unto the mighty God of Jacob, Surely I will not come into the tabernacle of my house, nor go up into my bed. I will not give sleep to mine eyes, nor slumber to mine eyelids, until I find out a place for the Lord and habitation for the mighty God of Jacob.
In one sense, it's a bit foolish if you think of this man. Though a great being on earth, still a mortal whose breath is in his nostrils. This man wants to make a house for God. It's like, say a little boy, a little baby, say Felicia, suddenly gets this burden, I want to buy a big building for the church. And you look at her and say, how are you even talking? How could you ever do that? And it's like David wanting to make a big house for God and wants to find a place where God can rest. And do you know the answer that God gave him? You read verse 13.
For the Lord hath chosen Zion, he hath decided for his habitation.
God has chosen Zion, and he has desired it for his habitation. No, it's like, it's like a house. We all move into a house. But one thing, some believers can't stay in one house. They move from house to house to house because they're never happy. But when God moved into Zion, do you know what he said? He said, I will never move out. Read the next verse.
This is my rest forever. Here will I dwell, for I have desired it.
Zion is a mount. And God says, I will rest in this mount forever, or this is my Everest. This is my Mount Everest, and I will stay here forever and ever. This is God's permanent dwelling place. Now David was the world's greatest king. If ever we can say that there was a greatest king in the history of this world, undoubtedly it was King David. His achievements, they're all unparalleled until today. And this man had so much, the whole world was at his feet, and he had opportunities to see anything and everything. He had money, he had opportunity, he had everything at his fingertips. But do you know what was driving him to the point of insanity? He had a passion, a longing. There was something that he was longing for. His heart was panting for it. And he says, one thing have I desired of the Lord. Psalm 27:4 tells us, he says, one thing have I desired of the Lord, and that one thing will I seek after. And what was that he was seeking after? That I may dwell in the house of the Lord. I want to dwell. You see, he is giving us a little deeper insight into his desire. I don't want to be a tourist. I want to be an inmate. I want to actually stay in a faith home. I want to dwell in the house of God. Not for one day, not for 2 days, not to test and see. They say faith home life is very interesting. Alright, let me go and stay there for 2 weeks and see. He didn't say that. What did he say? That I might dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. I want to be a servant of God. That was David's desire. Despite being the greatest king in the world, he knew there was something even greater. I want to be a servant of God, and I want to dwell in God's house. What is so beautiful about the house of God? What is so beautiful about the faith home? Some of you have seen the faith homes in India. White walls and blue windows. White and blue, that's the faith home. The combination. White and blue. So is that so beautiful? What is so beautiful about the faith home? If you ever go into a faith home and see, there is nothing outstandingly beautiful for a monarch, for the world's greatest king, to want to leave his palace and want to come and stay in a faith home. I don't want to be a king, I want to be a servant of God. What could be so great about that he wanted to leave everything he had? He had something that people would die for. and he was willing to leave it to become God's servant. I want to dwell in the house of God forever. So there must be something beautiful about the faith home. What is it? Let me tell you what it is. He wanted to come and live in the faith home. Why? What does the rest of the verse say? To behold the beauty of the Lord. Now we all may like to look at the night sky and behold the beauty of the stars. But even if you hold a telescope and look, you can't, because the atmosphere is so polluted. So if you want to really have a good view of the stars, you need to go probably to the North Pole or somewhere where they have set up a telescope and where atmospheric pollution is to the minimum. Then you can have an unhindered view of space. The faith home is the place where you can have the best view of God. And you're all invited to stay all the days of your life. It's the place where you can see God and the place where you can enjoy the best view of God. Before servants of God come and stay in a faith home, God gives them a little glimpse, just one passing glimpse of His beauty, and then He hides. But that glimpse is enough. From that point, a restlessness grows in them. Something is tugging at their heart, and they know, like a fish out of the water, they feel restless and restless and restless. I want to be there. I want to be there. I know that is my place, and they cannot be at home because Zion has become their home. And they have to be there, and they know their heart is pining, their heart is longing. So even before that, they actually come and stay in a faith home. God begins to work in their hearts. And one glimpse of that beauty and the desire for marriage just vanishes like snow melting in the sun. And the passion for Christ begins to dominate their hearts, and it becomes their longing, it becomes their song, it becomes their hope. This happened in my home nearly 40 years ago. Now you may think, then he must be 60 years old. I'm somewhere there, but not quite. But it didn't happen to me, it happened to my parents, which I never knew them. But my mother, once she was reading the Bible and she came across a passage in Revelation 14 which spoke about Zion, and that just stayed in her, and she always longed, who are these people? What is this life? What kind of life is this? And God began to work in her heart. God began to work in my father's heart, and they both made a decision. Let us live hereafter like servants of God. For 22 years they consecrated their married life, and they lived like servants of God, waiting for the day when God would call them. God called my father first. Instead of coming in, he went directly up. And then, on the right day, as a family, we stepped out to serve God. And when God spoke to me about Zion, it was probably a few months before we actually stepped out. I remember so many nights when I would wake up with tears down my face and I would be singing the songs of Zion. And my heart was crying. I remember when I was in college, in Loyola College, I was in the chemistry laboratory and we were doing some experiment, and then I would just put everything down and I just sat down and I started crying. And my friends asked, is everything okay? I said, no, it's not. What's the matter? I want to go to the faith home. What is a faith home? Where is it? I thought probably I said too much. But I said, I'm not happy here. This is not my place. There is a place there. There's a faith home. And I know the spot for me. There's a pillar there. There's a mat there. I want to go and sit there. So is that why you're crying? I said, yes. They must have thought I've lost my marbles, and they were right, I did. Because that's what happens to you. The passion for God's house, it drives you to insanity. And the longing and longing and longing was there. And that is how God begins to deal with His people. Many years ago, there was a young girl who was engaged to be married, and she was all into fashion and beauty, and she was longing for it. But at the same time, she was a believer, and she was engaged, and it was a Sunday evening service in the Madras Convention, and she was sitting and listening to the message, and the message was about Zion. And through the message, God began to speak to her. The very next day, she filled the form and joined the ministry. So many years later, today, she's serving God in the UK. And how God turns people's lives upside down with one glimpse of this glorious place, His own home, His own resting place. Is this all real? Yes, definitely real. God calls anyone at any time, married or unmarried. Sometimes He reveals His plan and purpose. So if there is anyone here, if you have a calling to serve God, and if you have a desire, you may not even be sure of your calling, but you feel deep in your heart, it doesn't matter how old or how young or how educated or uneducated, how clever or stupid, it doesn't matter. Those things are immaterial. Deep inside your heart, do you feel there's a spark, a longing? What is that life? I want to be there. I want to tell you one thing. The desire to serve God, the desire is not from man. When I was 14 years old, I was asked by someone, would you like to be a servant of God? I said, yes. Provided I am given access to a library where I can read Superman comics, and I'm allowed to play cricket every day. And they asked why? Because for me, serving God was going and staying in a boring building from morning to evening, praying and eating food. Boring life. What a boring life. And me going and living there? Oh, no way. Unless, of course, I'm given some freedom to enjoy the world. That was my understanding of Zion. Obviously, at 14, you know nothing else. But of course, these days, God begins to speak to children younger than 14. So if you're 14 or 13 or 12, and God begins to stir up your heart, as we heard in the testimony, how God began to stir up the daughter's heart and speak to her. God can be speaking to our children, and I'll tell you one thing, parents. If God has called your children for Zion, never hold them back. You have to be honored and so happy, and dare I say proud, to know that God has chosen one of your children. How many parents are willing to give your children to Jesus to serve God? Raise your hands. If the Lord calls my son, if the Lord calls my daughter, here, the Father gave His only Son for me, and I am willing to give my child for Jesus. How many parents say, yes, I am willing to give my child for Jesus? Say hallelujah. Amen. Praise the Lord. It's such a glorious honor. And when a family gives a child for Jesus, I've always seen that family is greatly honored by God. It is a great calling. But sometimes God, He doesn't just go for the child, He goes for the parents also. So if you probably, as a family, you can come out to serve God. If God is speaking in your heart and putting a desire in your heart. Now, don't come and tell the whole church, God has been putting a desire to serve the Lord, so probably I'm going to serve God. Don't say all that. Keep it a secret. Keep it a secret. Nurse it in your heart. Be like Mary, the mother of Jesus. We read of Mary, she kept those things in her heart. Keep it in your heart. A time will come when it will blossom, and one day you will be inside. I'll tell you, living in the faith home is beautiful. At the moment, I'm in heaven. I'm living in heaven. God has brought the best servants of God, and faith home is heaven. Living in a faith home is heaven. If you come in, you will run out, unless you're called to be in the house of God. If you have a calling to serve God, I'll tell you, serving Jesus is a beautiful life. You wake up in the morning and you're in the house of God. Then you sit down and pray. You're talking to Jesus. Then you go down for morning praising. your whole life is around Jesus, and if you love Him, if you've got a passion for Him, what better thing to do? If a king, the world's greatest king, who had all the pleasures of this world to enjoy, wanted to throw everything away to live in the house of God, you tell me, even if you don't believe me, believe that man. There must be something there. There must be something there. The servants of God, actually, they are very, very ordinary people. But they've received an extraordinary mercy. God has given them an extraordinary revelation. That is why I would say that all believers will not understand. I'm not saying all believers are called. Now please don't come and queue up there at Balliol. We'll have problems from the neighbors. I'm not saying all believers are called to serve God. Some believers are not called to serve God full time, but you can serve God in your capacity as a believer. But what I'm trying to say is this. When God has called you, He opens your eyes to see something that you have not seen before. You begin to understand things you've never understood before. And those who don't understand those things, they are very likely to misunderstand those things. So, when God has called you for Zion, He opens your eyes to see something, and something happens to your heart. The love of Jesus begins to possess you. And this love makes you mad for Him. And it makes you willing to do anything for Him, to leave everything in this world, to leave everything and follow Him. Now, let me tell you one more thing. This love for Jesus and this great calling, it doesn't make us great. It actually humbles us. And a true servant of God always feels unworthy to be in the faith home. A true servant of God never ever thinks, I'm a servant of God, so I'm greater than you. All you believers, you're down there. I am up here. Anybody wants to see me, you step on a ladder and then you talk to me face to face. A servant of God won't feel like that. A servant of God always says, I'm not worthy to be in this place. It's such a humbling revelation to know that we are living in God's house. Why do I say God's house? Why is it called house of God? Zion is the house of God. Do you know that in eternity there is a faith home? And that faith home is Zion. Because that is where God is, and that is where the servants of God will also be. So the faith home in eternity is Zion. By the way, you're invited there also. So it's a beautiful place. And what I want to make you understand, rather I want to clear a misunderstanding. Some people are attracted to the ministry thinking it is a glamorous vocation. Like you have pop stars and rock stars and sports stars, and now we have gospel stars. After all, servants of God are stars in His right hand, isn't it? But don't ever look at it like that. Don't think that it is all about preaching and singing and leading the worship and playing the keyboard and looking at all the people and all the people staring at you, and this man stands there and preaches and these people are all the time writing. I wish I could also do that. I wish I could go and say something and all these believers open their notebooks and write. Wow! I wish I could have a taste of that. If that's what you come for, you'll be thoroughly disappointed. That is not the attraction at all. Because that is not what is pulling us. So don't come for that. Don't ever be disappointed with those things. I want to tell you, faith home life is heaven, and it's a beautiful life. It's like, living on a launching pad, and anytime God presses the button and we go up there and we are with Jesus. I don't know if some of you know one pastor called Pastor Michael Woodham in America. He's a pastor who visited us in the UK and Europe, and for our conventions. Last week, he went for a rehearsal, a wedding rehearsal, and the people are getting ready for their wedding. He came back to the faith home, and he told his co-workers, I want you all to sing a song. And that song is Blessed Zion. He said, all of you sing that song. And so they all sang that song, and they never knew that day he went to be with the Lord. He was ready to go home. Pastor Michael Woodham has gone to be with the Lord. So this is the beauty of Zion. Yesterday I had a letter from a particular servant of God. And the servant of God said these words. For the past 2 years, I've had this deep longing to hear Jesus say, you can leave your prison and come home. When I say prison, I don't mean faith home. I mean this body. You can leave this body and you can come home. So the servant of God said, this desire is greatly increasing. I am all the time imagining hugging the feet of Jesus and crying, for I am not worthy even to touch His feet. How then would I dare look at His face? But this is why I am begging you to pray for me daily, 5 minutes, for I am really longing to go home. Believers too must have a love for Zion. Believers also must love Zion, because they are also serving the same God. You are also loving the same God who dwells in Zion. Therefore, everything about Zion should also fascinate you. Angels love Zion. And we must love Zion. We must love the doctrines of Zion, the teachings of Zion. The servants of God, we read about them. They favor even the dust of Zion, meaning the little teachings of Zion. And we must love the standard of Zion, the calling of Zion, the consecration of Zion, the beauty of Zion. And all those who are not able to make it there, you must weep, because that's what the Bible says. The captives in Psalm 137 verse 1. What do the captives do who are taken away from Zion? What do? Psalm 137 verse 1.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, we wept when we remembered Zion.
Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. When they think of Zion, they begin to weep. Lord, what am I doing here in Babylon? What am I doing in this place? God, that is my place. I have to be there, but I'm trapped here. I'll tell you, if you weep for Zion, one day God will take you out of Babylon and bring you into Zion. So if you've got that sorrow in your heart, you cry to God, God, I have a longing to be in your house. Lord, at least one day, if I have to die the next day, at least I can say for the rest of my life, I was in Zion. I was in the house of God. Believers must have that desire. But who then can hate Zion? The first verse we read says, all those who hate Zion will be confounded. How can a person hate Zion? Yes, I'll tell you, there's one person who hates Zion, and he is Lucifer. Why does he hate Zion? Because he wanted Zion. Lucifer wanted Zion. And we read of him in Isaiah chapter 14. Lucifer wanted Zion, but he never got it because he wanted it for the wrong reason anyway. He wasn't called there, first of all. And he also wanted it for the wrong reason. I'll read from verse 12 downwards. I will read. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. He wanted to go even above the stars. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north, that's Zion. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. What is wrong? How many of you want to be like Jesus? We all want to be like Jesus. And Lucifer said, I also want to be like Jesus. You know what happened? He was cast into hell. What was wrong with his desire? He wants to be like Jesus. We also want to be like Jesus. He was cast into hell for his desire. Why? When he wanted to be like the Most High, he didn't say, I want to have the character of the Most High. I want the power of the Most High. I want to rule like the Most High. I want to be in charge like the Most High. And I'll tell you, whether believer or servant of God, anyone has that desire. I want to rule. I want people under me. I remember when I was in my training, there was a brother with me. I don't want to speak about these things, but one day he turned and told me, he said, you know, Even as a believer, I knew how to run the house of God. And I have got that in me. I'm waiting for a transfer. I'm waiting to be put in charge. I'm waiting to run a faith home. And he was transferred 2 weeks later. And 2 weeks after that, he left the ministry. It is not for people who want to rule, who know how to order and control and organize. It's not for that. We are not rulers. We are servants. Lucifer said, I want to be like the Most High, meaning I want to be in charge. I want to be the boss. I want to be the head. The next verse says, Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake the kingdoms? Lucifer wanted Zion, and he did not get it. And that drove him insane. It drove him into terrible anger. The nature of jealousy began to drive Lucifer against Zion, and until today he is the enemy of Zion. He is one who hates Zion. But believers, don't share that passion. Do not hate Zion. I remember once, as servants of God, we visited a house many years ago, and we were talking to the believers there. That believer suddenly said, Oh, I hate this ministry. Oh, I don't like this ministry. And we were thinking, is this ministry such a horrible thing for you to talk about it like it is some terrible thing? Oh no, this ministry, I don't like. So obviously when a person talks like that, there must be a history behind that. And then I realized why this person talks against the ministry. If ever a believer talks against serving God, talks against the ministry, there is a history behind it. Lucifer always speaks against Zion, against serving God. And there's a history behind it. And he wants us to hate Zion. But we must not hate Zion. Instead, we must love Zion. Because if we hate Zion, immediately, instantly, we will start backsliding. That is why in that first verse we read, those who hate Zion will immediately be turned back. A backsliding begins, you may be in the church, but you will be far from God. Backsliding doesn't mean you leave UPC and you go into some other PC. Backsliding means you can be in UPC, but you will be away from God. You can be a member of the church, but you will be definitely not near the heart of God. And what else did we read there in the next verse? Psalm 129, we'll read that and finish. Psalm 129. What happens if those who hate Zion, what happens to them if you read verse 6?
Let them be as the grass upon the housetops, which withereth afore it groweth up.
Let them be as grass upon the housetops. Have you ever seen grass on a house? You never see it on the house, you see it on the ground. But in Judah, the tops of the houses were flat, and grass grew upon them because they were covered with plaster of terrace. But because of that, they were exposed to the scorching heat of the sun, and they withered almost instantly. Those who hate Zion are compared to grass on the housetop. They will wither and they will perish. So let us not hate Zion. Let us understand Zion doesn't mean ministry, or Zion doesn't mean servants of God. Of course, when God speaks of Zion, He's speaking about servants of God. But what is Zion? Zion is God's house, God's dwelling place. And it is your God. So you must love Zion. Those who love God, you will love Zion. Those who love Jesus, you will love Zion. And praise God if from this island assembly, God raises up a little group to serve God. Therefore I leave you with this. If there is a spark in your heart, if there is a tug at your heart, something that is making you love the Lord and love His house, and you are wishing, what a great calling, what a beautiful calling. All cannot think like that. To leave everything and follow Jesus, all cannot think like that. Some will hate to think that. No way, I can't. I don't want. Some hands, when I said, how many of you are willing to give your children? Some hands went up. Some hands remain there. Some people, they actually put it down, making sure it's nowhere up, in case God sees that and He starts pulling their children away. So they push their hands down. No way! I'm not going to give my child to serve God. No way! To go and stay in a faith home? Go and cook and make food and coffee and wash clothes. My daughter? No way! I'm not going to give her to Jesus. I'm going to give it to one fat man there. Let him marry and beat my daughter for the rest of her life. Have you ever heard of anything more stupid? That's what our people keep doing all over the world. You don't be stupid. If God has called you and your children, go. That's the best in the world. Shall we stand?